One more indictment that I think this election's over. One more. I did everything right and they indicted me.
They indicted me just again. Yes, Donald Trump now up for more indictments. Yes, 91 crimes and 4 criminal cases now for Donald Trump. 4 different jurisdictions, and now with this Georgia indictment coming public, this is just yet another. So Donald Trump and 18 other allies were indicted in Georgia on Monday over their efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Yes, we've heard about these things, from the Raffensperger phone call to trying to change up electors to lying about what people are doing and voting machines and everything else that they could possibly do. That's what Donald Trump is now up on. Let's go to some of these details because it got even further now, because it's looking like a criminal enterprise type of association that's going on just to keep him in power. Let's jump straight into this from the AP. The nearly 100-page indictment details dozens of acts by Trump or his allies to undo his defeat. That includes beseeching Georgia's Republican Secretary of State to find enough votes for him to win in this battleground state, harassing an election worker who faced false claims of fraud, and attempting to persuade Georgia lawmakers to ignore the will of voters and appoint a new slate of electoral college electors favorable to Trump. In one primary brazen episode, it also outlines a plot involving one of his lawyers to access voting machines in a rural Georgia county and steal data from a voting machine company. Insanity. So again, criminal enterprise type of stuff, because they had so many different angles and directions that they were going about trying to overturn this election, and he's still on that same tip. Check it out. Caitlin Collins is also on CNN talking about some of these other folks that have been indicted. Let's check this out.
Is not just Trump's name is on this, but it's the others that are on this. And so we've got Donald John Trump, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Mark Meadows is on here, Jake. Ken Cheeseborough, that's another unindicted co-conspirator in the previous indictment. Jeffrey Clark, that's the former Justice Department official that wanted to be named the acting attorney general, nearly did. Jenna Ellis, the Trump attorney. Ray Smith, another attorney. Robert Cheeley. Mike Roman, that's the Trump campaign official who was handling fake electors in that time period, Jake, from the election to through December. He's someone who's also been part of the, he had met with investigators in Jack Smith's investigation. His name is on here. And David James Schaefer, that I believe is the top former Republican official. He was in a campaign fundraising role.
Some names that you guys probably recognize, some big names that you recognize that are on that list as a part of this whole plot, filling this whole thing out. So all 19 of them, Trump and his co-defendants, also had to surrender by August 25th. Yes, surrender for these charges. We'll see how much more of this is gonna go down that way. But let's look at a few more of these charges, Dave, before we let you in on where this could possibly go. Because these are some of these counts that are included in what it is that they did as a bit of a breakdown. Let's check this out. 22 counts related to forgery or false documents and statements. More related to soliciting or impersonating public officers. This is serious stuff. 3 more related to influencing witnesses. 3 more related to election fraud or defrauding the state. 3 more related to computer tampering, another related to racketeering, yeah, and another related to perjury. So the idea is, he thinks, as we saw as we started off here, that more charges, more me getting more attention, maybe I can get back into the White House. Because again, the whole point here is to avoid all these things that he was trying to do, because he thought the first wave would work. When it didn't, they have to shift to other things. Many of these 161 acts by Trump and his associates outlined in this Georgia indictment, they've already been seeing a lot of attention, as we talked about. We've heard the perfect phone call and just find me 11,872, whatever he said. More votes, that's one more than we need. It's all been out there in plain sight. Now finally we have actual indictments coming that way. Before we get to more of those charges by Trump specifically, first thoughts here though, David. We see it over and over again. As we talked about, 91 different criminal counts and all these things, 4 different indictments, how many different jurisdictions. But the thing is they keep coming with this positivity. Is it all fake?
Well, what's so interesting, Jayar, is if you look at the federal indictments, which were very sort of narrow, precise, pointed, and it looks like down in Georgia, Fani Willis took more of the everything thrown against the wall. And I would argue that she probably got evidence to support it all, but instead of a narrowly tailored indictment, she's going with sort of the gunshot approach. It's a little bit unusual for her to say, as she did last night, that she wants to try all of them at the same time. That's sort of unfathomable. However, the one thing that sort of jumps out to me, Jayar, is that as I was reading about this, the racketeering laws are actually, it's easier to prove racketeering and convict somebody in racketeering under Georgia law than it is literally under the federal statutes. Georgia is one of those sort of oddball sort of states in a way on this, in which the laws, it's a lot easier for a prosecutor in Georgia than most other states when it comes to racketeering, and certainly easier than the federal government. So I used to be of the mindset that, well, you should always let the federal cases go first, and local prosecutors wait their turn, and then they bring their cases. But at this point with Donald Trump, go for it. If anyone else feels that she has the evidence to prove all these different counts, she should move forward.
Let's go to actually graphic 4 now, because you point out the racketeering charges. And this is the thing, people have pointed out and said how Trump acts and tends to look like a bit of a mobster character, and it's all coming together really fast because he's been charged with violating Georgia's Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Yeah, everyone else knows that as RICO from watching mobster movies. And this federal version of the law was originally designed to prosecute mob bosses who were leading complex criminal enterprises. Georgia's version, which is one of the most expansive in the country, as you pointed out, David, allows prosecutors to weave together several alleged crimes, and in this case, conspiracy to defraud the state, false statements in writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, computer theft, and dozens of other charges, all into one, which would carry up to 20 years in prison. More things that would potentially scare this guy. And as you guys heard them go through all these people, their names, I mean, there was a couple that stood out. Maybe the primary one was Rudy Giuliani. Here's the charges on this guy. He's charged with making false statements for allegedly lying to lawmakers by claiming that more than 96,000 mail-in ballots were counted in Georgia, despite there being no record of them having been returned to a county elections office, and that a voting machine in Michigan wrongly recorded 6,000 votes for Biden that were actually cast for Trump. So again, he does this with help. It's always been that way. He always needed help with getting these types of things pushed through, and all these names and all these figures were maybe they're lower level or people you wouldn't have heard of. Some of these are bigger, and those others that were bigger were jumping ship before, but Rudy Giuliani apparently doesn't understand it. And by the way, the irony of this is Rudy Giuliani made a name for himself, at least from what I remember, as far as taking down mobsters. Now he finds himself working with one. Am I wrong on that? He was known for taking down mobsters.
Right. No, as U.S. Attorney in New York, he took down a lot of mobsters and mafia figures using RICO statutes that were applicable to federal law. Now he's going to face even more RICO stuff down in Georgia. It's just look, I'm satisfied to hear that Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and some of the other sort of cronies around Donald Trump now have to deal with this headache. It's new for them. Obviously, Donald Trump's been indicted here other times, but for them to now have to think about going to Georgia and dealing with defense lawyers and all that, that's a really big pain in the you know what. As for Donald Trump, I think the takeaway is it's probably nothing new to him, except to the extent that, as we've said before, he can pardon, if he wins the presidential election, he can probably wipe out the federal indictments, but he doesn't have that authority over New York and Georgia, and that's why I think those two cases remain important.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.